Excellent. We are there. I've toggled it on. If I go to, oh, we are live on Facebook. And if I go to,
and Andre, you're gonna face the camera, right?
I will. Yeah. I'm just checking. Here it is. There's a live stream up. It was not what I wanted. So let me just copy and paste this for 1 second. Just so people know what they're watching on Facebook. I mean, on YouTube. And see things. Okay, it looks like we are live. Hold on. There a link. Indeed, we are live. Okay, that means that I can go back to all of our wonderful people here on Zoom. We will start the webinar. That means recording is in progress. The doors will open up. Mariu and Yimu, if you guys can find the link for yourselves, I will move on to everything else tonight. How about that? Let's see, everybody is filtering in tonight. Okay. Let's see how many attendees. Oh, look at that. We've shot up to over 100 people right into the door. All right. As everybody filters in, I'm going to say dobry večer to everybody. Thank you, everybody, for joining us on this very special nonpartisan voter education forum. You may have seen other people do similar events over the last couple of weeks, and I'm sure you will hear a lot more about the upcoming election in the United States in the coming weeks as well. So what we've decided is to invite a number of experts here tonight to have this conversation. We are doing this through the Zoom platform, and that means that we will be able to take your questions in the Q&A section of Zoom, as well as this is being live streamed on YouTube and Facebook as well. So we will be trying to catch as many of those questions as well. But to make sure that we have enough time for that, because we've only allotted 1 hour for all of our wonderful experts, we're going to get right to them and address them with some pre-selected questions right from the very beginning. Let me introduce who you're going to be hearing tonight from. So first and foremost, we have our very good friend, Ambassador John Herbst. For those of you who haven't seen any of UCCA's other co-sponsored conferences, but if you are somebody who's deeply involved in understanding Ukraine, you will know him as a former ambassador to Ukraine. We're coming up on the 20th anniversary of that Orange Revolution this year, as well as a former ambassador to Uzbekistan and a man who has over 31 years of foreign policy experience at the State Department. He is currently, and for quite some time, been the senior director of the Eurasia Center at the Atlantic Council. Following him, we're going to turn to Sasha Ustinova. If you have been involved in activism, certainly in the last 5 years, you may have actually even seen Alexandra in the United States on Capitol Hill or other areas of the United States as well. She is currently a member of Parliament of Ukraine, the Verkhovna Rada, but she's also a longtime anti-corruption activist within Ukraine. Within the Rada, she is chair of the Parliamentary Special Commission on Arms Control, and she is also the chair of the Holos fraction. We also have a wonderful friend of Ukraine, and as we were discussing before you logged on, somebody who has some family relations with Ukraine, former representative, a 6-term congressman from Illinois 6th District, Peter Roskam. During Peter's term, he not only served throughout both Democratic and Republican presidential administrations, but he also served on a number of very important caucuses and chaired 3 subcommittees of the very influential Ways and Means Committee in the House. We also have with us Timofey Milovanov. We are very, very grateful for Timofey for logging in from Ukraine at this time, at this particular hour of the night. Timofey is president of the Kyiv School of Economics. He is also an associate professor of economics at the University of Pittsburgh. For those who are not just activists, but very actively involved online, you'll know that subscribing to any of Tim's social media feeds will get you a lot of reactions every day, and probably some of the better takes on what's happening in Ukraine. And no disrespect to everybody else's social media, by the way. And lastly, we have Rai Barkat with us. Rai is a co-founder and CEO of With Honor. Very much in line with what we're trying to do tonight, which is a nonpartisan voter education forum. Rai started this cross-partisan political nonprofit called withhonor.org, and it fights the polarization within Congress with principled leadership of veterans. So with that in mind, I have an opening question that I'd like to address to all of you in the order that I introduced you, but I'll remind everybody of that as we go through that. So with the first response from Ambassador Herbst, I'd like to ask you this first question, everybody, this first question. So some say, why, in your opinion, is Ukrainian victory over Putin's regime is very important for the average American voter? Ambassador Herbst.
Okay, it's pretty simple. American security and American prosperity are based upon the security arrangements that we organized after World War II. And that starts first and foremost with NATO. Putin is pursuing a policy designed to undermine that security system. Putin has declared the United States to be its principal adversary, its principal enemy. And that is his objective, to weaken, if not destroy NATO, and for that matter, the European Union. If Putin succeeds in Ukraine, there's a very good chance he will launch certainly a provocation, but even a strike against one of the difficult to defend NATO allies, like Estonia or Latvia or Lithuania. So if we don't make sure Ukraine defeats Putin in Ukraine, we're going to spend far more on our defense, and we may need to spend American lives defending our NATO allies. It's that simple.
Thank you. You are right. It is a simple thing if you have the eloquence to make it as succinct as you just did. Sasha, can I add your response to that as well? Again, the question being Ukrainian victory over Putin regime. How is it important for an average American voter from your perspective?
Well, first of all, let me thank you for organizing this event. This is amazing that it has been done, and how many Ukrainian organizations had come together to put up this. Regarding your question, I think Ambassador Herbst is 100% right. If you don't want to have American boots on the ground, very soon protecting one of the NATO countries, it's much cheaper and much more effective to invest right now in Ukraine because the Ukrainian victory is not going to be just a Ukrainian victory. It's going to be the victory of the democracies over autocracies. And with the recent events with the North Korea sending not only ballistic missiles, about 3 million shells that has been already sent to Ukraine, but also sending the troops is a great example how how autocracies can be easily unified against the democratic world. And when we see that they are behaving like allies, while we still try to persuade our partners for more support, this is not just Ukraine fighting Russia. This is democracies fighting autocracies. It's good over bad. And if the if the democratic world loses, first, America is going to lose its leading position in the world because China is watching and Taiwan is going to be next. And second, it's going to be obvious that democracies has failed because they cannot, all combined democracies in the world cannot protect one single country who is fighting till the last breath.
Дякую, Sasha. Again, another very experienced hand because you're very succinct at something that maybe some of us will take 10 minutes to explain. So my thank you to there. Congressman, having served so much and having spoken to constituents throughout the years, what is your perspective for the average American voter, Ukrainian victory over Putin's regime? Is it important? How is it important for the average American voter?
It's absolutely vital. Let me relay an observation that I heard from Ambassador Herbst when he was speaking a few years ago to a Ukrainian audience in Chicago. And he described a season in the life of Ukraine when Ukraine, you could have described it as the worst place on earth. In other words, the place in the 1930s that had suffered the Holodomor famine, Nazi invasion, one thing after another, and had just been really on its heels. And the ambassador's observations were top of mind for me when I was an election observer. The first time when Poroshenko was on the ballot, when he was first elected back in 2014, I was up in Chernihiv. And we were out in the countryside, and I was in a voting place that was very modest. It was a school building. It was rural, and there was no elevator, of course, and the polling place was up on the second floor. And in walks two old ladies, like right out of the movies, with the kerchief, and they're moving very, very, very slowly. And I was sitting and I was watching them, and I couldn't speak to them because I didn't know the language. And yet my imagination began to run. And as I was watching them, I began to think, okay, these women are probably my mother's age. My mother was born in 1930. So what have they seen, these two women, in their lives? And I began to think, wow, they've seen a number of the things that I described a minute ago: the famine, invasion, Soviet domination, the Chernobyl disaster. It was the one thing after another. And yet these women come out and they're actively participating and they're voting in this process. And it was so encouraging to me to see this incredible resiliency and their willingness to actively participate in this process. Okay, so how is that connected to an average American? How is that connected from somebody in, around the corner from me here in Wheaton, Illinois? Well, the connection is that American prosperity and stability is inextricably linked to world order and the rule of law. And to step back and to let Putin's aggression go unremarked and undefended is basically to give a tyrant open field running. And as we know, that just doesn't end well. So somehow the idea that, well, you can just step aside and it's, quote, only Ukraine and it will be limited to Ukraine. We can't kid ourselves. This isn't going to be limited to Ukraine. I was an election observer this weekend. On Sunday, I was in Moldova, and Moldova was undergoing an election, and the Western-oriented president was running for re-election. And there was a referendum on the ballot where Moldovans were deciding whether or not they wanted to go into the European Union. And the Russian activity on the ground and the malevolence and the foreign interference, the criminal enterprises that were underway to try and influence this little tiny country of 3 million people was just breathtaking. And the referendum barely passed. Maya Sandu, the Western-leaning president, will go into a second round. She got the most votes, but it's anybody's guess where this thing goes. And you take my point. So it's Ukraine, then it's Moldova, and then, as the ambassador mentioned a couple of minutes ago, it's one of the Baltic states, and then we're off to the races. So it is I would submit to you that there aren't problems where you say, you know what, let's just leave it alone and let's just sort of see what happens. No, we need to make sure that Ukraine is victorious here. And if they are victorious, it will have a restraining influence on a lot of the other negative activities that we see around the world, and what the Iranians are doing, what the Chinese are doing, and what other strong men are doing to try and impose their will on people that simply want to be free.
Thank you so much, Congressman. I'd like to, Rai, can I jump to you right now, because I have an interesting follow-up for Timofey. So if I can check in with you right now, again, the question going for the average American voter, we've heard from three people from three distinct perspectives, but in your mind, why is Ukraine's victory over the Putin regime important for the average American voter?
Well, thank you so much. And I thought Congressman Roskam eloquently gave the examples that reinforced Ambassador Herbst and of course, Sasha, who's such a national asset for Ukraine and has the deepest of relationships in Congress with Republicans and Democrats. Thank you, Sasha, for all you do at your own expense, often traveling throughout the United States. Let me offer, instead of a geopolitical reason, a different one that came to me about 3 weeks ago. With Honor, which is principally focused on fighting polarization in Congress, has unified around this particular set of issues, really, of pushing for legislation for Ukraine. And we got in contact through Sasha with the Ukrainian Cultural Forces, which is this amazing band of former professional musicians who have become soldiers, many of whom were wounded grievously on the front lines, and are now touring the United States with the assistance of the Howard Buffett Foundation. With Honor, put together a performance in Congress. And then we reached out to some of our allies throughout the United States. They're still touring, by the way. It's an amazing performance. We helped connect them with the President George H.W. and W. Bush libraries, where they'll perform next week. And 2 weeks ago, I was with them for the celebration of President Carter's 100th birthday at the Jimmy Carter Library. But I want to focus instead on a comment that was made at a high school. They performed at my daughter's high school in Charlotte, North Carolina, and a student asked them afterwards, essentially the question, like, thank you for this amazing performance. What is significant about this fight? How does it connect to us? And one of the soldiers, who was a performer, told a story about a children's hospital that we had visited in Kyiv that was bombed. And then he relayed that, there are over 200, I believe he said over 280 hospitals that have been bombed throughout Ukraine. And I think that example of barbarism, which is what it is, really drove home why this is important for those teenagers in the United States. And so I'll just add to the commentary that the geopolitical pieces are absolutely essential. The humanitarian piece is also one that we can't lose.
Thank you so much, Rai. I love the fact that you highlighted the cultural forces. I think they've been a revelation, certainly this year throughout the United States. You're as often going to bump into them at one of these prestigious areas, like you said, some of these presidential libraries, as you are in a public park, because they're just so ready to meet directly with Americans and thank them personally through song and performance. Pana Milovanov, I would like to turn to you, and once again, can't thank you enough for logging in, given the time difference. But you certainly have a unique perspective on what we've been talking about so far, which is your perspective on what American voters think of valuing this Ukraine's victory. Why in your mind is it? And I do have a specific follow-up given your economic expertise as well.
Okay, thank you. I think it is incredibly important that Putin is checked through Ukraine, because otherwise it will, Russia will have to be checked somewhere else, and it's going to be more expensive, costly in lives, and will destabilize the world and the United States, in fact. I want to make two arguments which are out there, but they're often overlooked. One is that Putin has not built this war machine over the last 3 years, so just to take Donbass, another couple of villages. That could have been done with a very different, much smaller military force, or it could have been achieved through some kind of negotiations. Putin will have the problem of what to do with the aggressive Russia and the entire change and transformation of Russia towards aggressive foreign policy through force, whatever is the resolution of the situation in Ukraine. So that's, I think, a danger. The aggressive Russia, the aggressiveness of Russia, this is the problem that the world will have to deal with, regardless of what happens in Ukraine. The second point I would like to make is the role of China. If the United States is unable to resolve the war in Ukraine and the conflict in Ukraine in the manner that is acceptable to the democratic world, or is unable to resolve it completely, China will eventually move in, because China will be the pivotal player in influencing Russia. And so as a result of that, when China resolves the conflict one way or another in the area by putting some type of pressure or agreeing to some type of entering into some kind of agreement and support or pressure on Russia, the status of China in the world will rise significantly. It also will increase its ability to dictate what will happen in Taiwan, and that has immediate implications for the future of technology, of the industry, of productivity in the United States, and also of the stability in the Asian region. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tim. But as I mentioned, I did want to ask you a follow-up, because you touched on it briefly in terms of what this conflict has done in the global factor. But I'd like you to maybe bury down a little bit more for the perspective of an American taxpayer. So let's say we have heard that sending money overseas, whether it's military aid, financial aid, or what have you, that specifically as relates to the war against Ukraine, that this is a burden on American taxpayers. So let's say that that the Putin regime achieved a greater victory than what they even imagined at the beginning of the war. What would that mean to the U.S. economy and for the world economy?
So the cost of the war is there. The fact that Russia created an energy crisis in 2022 has already imposed on the world economy or the cost of over $1 trillion. So it's just that we don't see that cost. Every day, uninsured oil tankers with oil are passing through international waters all around the world. Russia is destabilizing global South food security in a very cynical way. Yesterday at the BRICS meetings, they're talking about how global food security is important, but this very week and the week before that, they're attacking the shipments to Egypt, actually to Palestinians as well, and to global South. So Russia is increasing costs of trade, which are gonna translate and already translating into inflation. Russia is creating instability in the energy markets. And Russia, most importantly, I think for the future of us, has started an arms race in artificial intelligence. We have seen that in cyber. We have seen its applications in propaganda space, in information space. We have seen its influence throughout the world, also in the United States. So all of that means that there will be less trust in the environment, and less trust means slower economic growth, less productivity of labor, lower salaries in the next decade, and overall less stability, which is absolutely bad for business. What we have seen in the last 3 decades, that the real wages and labor productivity in the United States has not grown that much. It has not kept up with the capital productivity. And that generated all kinds of domestic problems, basically inequality, wealth and income inequality. And in order to overcome those issues, that's inequality, in order to bring people to a better life standards, quality of life, trust is important, global trade is important, investment is important, and technology development in peaceful manner is important. And this is all Russia is trying to undermine, and unfortunately quite successfully.
Thank you very much for that. It really brings to light how much we are all interconnected in some way as far as thinking about our taxpayer dollars here, how much international events, whether it's oil tankers on another part of the globe, how much that can actually affect our pocketbooks here, and why that should be a factor when people make the decision whether they're going to be actively involved in democracy. And speaking of that, we have a couple of polls tonight to see how our people are involved. We've seen you through the login. We see some of those wonderful questions. Please keep entering questions in the Q&A. And I saw that wonderful response by the president of the Ukrainian Cultural Center in Los Angeles to Rai's comment about cultural forces that they are going to be performing at the Reagan Library in California. But for those of us who are here, and again, this is a voter education forum, we're going to pop up our first poll for everybody. It should pop up on your screen, and this one is asking of all of you where you plan, how you plan to vote this year. Because again, if you're not active in the democratic process, that means that our members of Congress, our senators, and even the White House really doesn't value, if you don't show that you value democracy, then they won't value you as a constituent worthy enough of caring about your position. So the poll asks, are you the type of person who votes on election day? Are you the type of person who votes in advance in person? That's what I plan to do here in New York City on October 26th. Or are you the type of person that has the option to vote by mail? Some of our Western states do that almost exclusively. And if that's the case, please log that in. And we have a fairly broad representation of both early and in person. And then about half of that, half of those percentages, 22 from the 40, will be voting by mail. Again, we do have plenty of people spread out across the United States. So thank you very much, everybody, for participating in that. I'd like to jump to, since we have both Ambassador Herbst, we have Sasha here, and even Congressman Roskam. Actually, this will be for all of us, because just today, there was a press briefing in the White House that brought this up to John Kirby. We, as Ukrainian activists, have been talking about this for the last couple of weeks, and it's probably one of every other question I get asked by Ukrainian journalists when they have me on, asking me how is this not front page news in the United States? So, Ambassador Herbst, I'm going to jump to you first on this question. The recent escalation of North Korea entering this war. We know for a fact that there are North Korean soldiers, North Korean personnel who have traveled to the territory of the Russian Federation fairly close by to Ukraine. We don't know what they would do since they haven't trained with Russian forces, or most of them don't speak Russian. But we know for a fact that they've at least made the trip. So this recent escalation, again, this is a question that often comes from journalists overseas. Why is this not being talked about more in the United States? But what does that mean for this conflict? The fact that we now have, in addition to the material coming from Iran, and the artillery from North Korea earlier, now having an actual other force from this axis of evil being involved. How does this change the game right now, or the international picture? Ambassador, I'm gonna ask you first.
Well, first, we're not sure if there are North Korean soldiers in Ukraine at the moment, or in the area of Russia where Ukraine has effective control, the Kursk Oblast and part of the Belgorod Oblast. But certainly, I am confident that the U.S. government is monitoring this closely. But even without this, the amount of war material that the North Koreans have provided to Russia has proved that the Russians do not have enough to conduct their war, their massive war full of war crimes on Ukraine, and they also rely on Iran for that. Philip Zelikow, a former senior U.S. official and an historian, wrote an article in the Texas National Security Review this past summer, pointing out that the cooperation amongst Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea is greater today than that between the original axis, meaning Nazi Germany, fascist Japan, and fascist Italy, up through the attack on Pearl Harbor and Hitler's declaration of war on the United States. The national security leaders in the United States, in the West, and the media in the West have not paid sufficient attention to this very real problem. I think it was Timothy and maybe others mentioned that if Putin wins in Ukraine, that puts winds in the sails of China, Iran, and North Korea. And North Korean possible sending of soldiers to fight, whether it's in Kursk Oblast of Russia or in Ukraine, is further evidence of their work together. There was a disgraceful comment made on background by an American official, reported in Politico earlier today, that there's nothing much we can do about this except by intervening militarily. That is defeatist thinking, and it's a reflection of the fact that while the Biden administration has done a lot to prevent a Russian victory in Ukraine, it has also been intimidated by Putin's constant nuclear threats, and therefore, ultimately, our policy has not been strong enough to enable Ukrainian victory. But we need to come up with a smart and strong response once it's clear that North Korean soldiers are fighting against Ukrainian soldiers, whether in Russia itself and especially in Ukraine.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ambassador. Sasha, do you have a thought on the Korean aspect?
Yes, thank you so much for giving me the possibility to speak here. And I just want to briefly mention on what Timothy Milana was talking about the taxpayers' dollars as well, which I think is really important. You know, every time my American friends are telling me, like, Sasha, we support you so much in your country, we believe in you, but you know, it is so expensive for the United States. We've been providing hundreds of billions of dollars. My question to them always is, how much would you be comfortable to give Ukraine to actually fight the war for all of the rest? Because if you're not fighting on the ground, none of the NATO soldiers is fighting on the ground, how much you would be comfortable giving us? The answer is normally like, I don't know, 5% of our budget. And when I'm telling them when it's less than 1, everybody freaks out. They can hardly believe in that because they hear Congress passing a bill, a supplemental on 60 billion. They don't know that 80% of this money actually stay in the States. They don't go to Ukraine. This is long-term contracts for the American companies that provides jobs, taxes, etc. Second, a lot of these money are not even related to Ukraine. I can tell you that not in the last, but in the previous supplemental, it was $500 million to buy grains for Africa because of the war in Ukraine, which means it has nothing to do with Ukraine, but this is an Ukrainian bill. And people honestly believe that this is something literally going in funds on the Ukrainian bank accounts. Third, which is, I think, is very important to understand, like every time we see an announcement that the administration and Pentagon puts out publicly, oh, there is an additional package for Ukraine for, I don't know, $500 million or $250 million, people do not understand that this is not actually additional package. This is the package formed out of the money that had been already allocated by Congress in the supplemental that was passed. So these money come out of those 60 billion or 40 billion that was the previous supplemental. And this is not additional, because people hear every second week that there is an additional package for Ukraine, additional support, blah, blah, blah. And they think that like hundreds of billions of dollars literally go into the Ukrainian bank accounts, which is totally untrue. And the majority of these money are staying exactly in the United States, providing more opportunities for the countries here. One thing that I also would like to mention, and this is very important for the for the American taxpayers, a lot of the companies, U.S. companies that are producing a lot of the weapons, all of the military stuff, actually cut their stocks up a lot. And they have now contracts, long-term contracts, not only for Ukraine, but for the rest of the world. Because if you look at the Europeans right now, they have doubled and some of them have tripled their actually money, their budget for the defense. And guess whom they're going to buy it from? From the United States. So I think we need to explain this picture widely and explain people that it's not only charity. This is literally investing money in you, in your own, first of all, production, and then your own security. Because if you compare how much it was sent in weapons to Ukraine, this is less than $100 billion within the 3 years of war. I'm sorry, if you compare it to the cost of the wars, let's say in Afghanistan, when it was trillions of dollars, this is uncomparable. And if we don't want, again, to have the boots on the ground and the costs that it would actually bring, I think this is much cheaper to invest in Ukraine. I can tell you the drones that cost $80,000 in the United States or over $100,000 in the United States can be done much cheaper in Ukraine and tested in Ukraine in the real war situation. And last time me and Dry went to the front lines, we actually saw that happening. And I think there are a lot of lessons that the US military can learn from this actual war, because this is the real enemy we'll have to fight. On the other side, if we talk about Koreans, I'll just give you an example. The Koreans had already provided 2.8 million shells to to Russians to fight Ukraine. I'm not talking about the ballistic missiles even. We already have the Koreans very close to the Ukrainian border, teaching Russians how to use their their mid-range ballistic missiles, and that has been proved. And every time we're talking, our military intel says that there are people from other countries fighting on the Russian side. Everybody tells us you don't have a proof. I remember we had the same situation with Cubans. So the first time we got a Cuban who was a war prisoner and put out him publicly, everybody was like, oh, seriously, Cuba is supporting Russia. Now I think we have the same situation with Koreans, because the South Korea and Ukraine has been talking out publicly loud that there is a huge problem that the Koreans will be sent there. We already have 2 battalions, which is over 10,000 people being trained to literally fight as infantry in Ukraine. And I think, again, I just want to mention, it is very difficult for us when we have to persuade our allies, let's say, for the deep strikes. And when I see public officials coming out at NSC or the administration saying, there is nothing we can do, yes, there is a lot that can be done. you can allow us the deep strikes. And that will change the situation on the ground. Because right now, Ukraine is fighting war with our hands tied behind our back, because we have the means, but there is a ban on how we can use them. And unless we can put down the Russian jets who are targeting our children's hospitals, and I cannot even imagine if something like that happened in the United States or any European countries, when the biggest children's hospital, which is Ahmadiyya, this is something to compare, it's like St. Jude's in the United States, was totally destroyed by a Russian missile. What would be the response? And we cannot have it. We cannot even target their military targets, just because there is still a fear for the nuclear escalation. And I just want to remind everyone, this fear has been there since day one. I remember advocating for the MiG-29 from Poland, and it was seen as escalation at the beginning of the war. Providing howitzers and 777 was an escalation. If those were provided 2 months upfront, not at the end of May, at the beginning of June, but in March, as we've been asking, we would not lose Mariupol. It would never be destroyed. And I just want to mention Mariupol is 400,000 people. This is half of the size of Washington, D.C. Second, HIMARS, NASAMS, Patriots, every type of weapon, even defensive, the air defense, was seen as an escalation. So on one side, we have Russia, Iran, and North Korea, who don't have to negotiate. They're just exchanging their technologies, providing everything they have on the shelves to their allies. And we have to back our partners, persuading them to let us strike at the military targets to protect our children. So I think right now what North Korea is doing is something that has been already done by others. And I think it's not going to be the end. And again, we're not asking for the world and for the United States, first of all, to fight in Ukraine, to put the boots on the ground. But there are a lot of technologies that can be used that we already have in Ukraine, but there is still a ban for them. And I'm 100% sure this ban is not going to be lifted before the elections. We had a big occasion 2 days ago. It was Austin, it was Kabul, everybody was in Kyiv. Zero bans lifted, 0 decisions made. So unfortunately, if this does not change, we will still be going to Congress on the Hill persuading them to give us additional 50 or 100,000 shells when Koreans don't need to negotiate. They just send $1 million. Thank you so much. I'm sorry for being a little bit emotional.
Do you mind if I jump in for a minute?
Yeah, please do. Please do.
Yeah, it's eloquent as always and really important points across the board. I just want to focus on a couple things that are practical that could actually get done in like the next 90 days. And I want to call out attention to Senator Roger Wicker, who's an Air Force veteran who we work with and with honor, who's part of our Senate alliance. He is a Republican from Mississippi, one of the most conservative states. He's the ranking member of the Senate Armed Services Committee. This week, he called on the Biden administration to move faster with the presidential drawdown. You know, and I included the link in the chat. I mean, just run the numbers. It's staggering. We're only transferring $400 million a month out of a $5.5 billion budget. That takes a year. You know, I served in the Marine Corps. Many of us serve. Many Ukrainians are now serving. Battles and wars can be won and lost within weeks. So, this is a clear and present ask that can be made. And if you are an American citizen on this call, you can make a difference by contacting your member of Congress, as Congressman Roskam notes. They pay attention. By the way, it is an election time. We're a non-partisan organization, but if you are an American and you support your representative and your senator, and they are in a race, think about going out and actually volunteering for them, and then get in front of them and look them in the eye, eyeball to eyeball, and said, I was there for you. This is what matters to me. And tell them about what Senator Wicker's doing. Tell them about what Representative Fitzpatrick, the most bipartisan member one of the most bipartisan members in Congress, who worked in the FBI in Ukraine, is a Republican. You can flag the bill that he's put forward, which would extend Lend-Lease and a lot of other important provisions. It's all in the chat. But those are some tangible actions that you can take. And I'd encourage you to do them, because this is going to be a tough fight. it's not just Ukraine. Everything in Congress is hard. We are at a level of polarization that is beyond historical beyond historical precedent, with the exception possibly of the Civil War. And so anyways, let me pause there before getting more on a soapbox, but thanks.
I feel that the gentleman from Illinois has been invoked enough times that we should turn to him. In addition to the fact that we've been talking about how much of the budget is being allocated, and I mentioned before your vast experience on Ways and Means, but I believe it's quite possible, you might correct me, you might be one of the people that, returning to my question asked earlier, has the most on the ground experience of understanding what South Korea thinks and the North Korean question. So Congressman, what can you answer both on the North Korea question and all the things that we've just been talking about as far as the budget?
So North Korea's aggression isn't a good thing. However, there is a silver lining. And the silver lining is that the mask is off. There's nobody out there who likes the North Koreans. There's nobody that likes the Iranians. And so the ability to tag Russia's affiliation with these two despicable regimes is incredibly helpful in the public debate. I think it's important for us to speak to the anxiety that's underway right now in both of these political parties. We've seen a lot of anxiety on the political right with the just complete nonsense and false narratives that we're all familiar with, but we haven't spoken about tonight. The anxiety that's coming on the left is interesting too, because it's an anxiety of hand-wringing, as if we're afraid of victory. And there's a relationship between how the administration has been handling Ukraine and the ability to get material quickly, as both Ryan and Alexandra articulated a minute ago. Some of these things could have been disposed of 2 years ago, if they'd really just been given the opportunity to do what they're capable of doing. The same thing we've seen in the relationship with Israel, who's been held back. Now Israel's had the ability to say, you know what, we're going to do our own thing. And for that we could discuss that on a whole nother seminar that we don't have time for. But I think it is important in this particular season, and by that I mean this election season, to get in front of elected members of Congress on both sides of the aisle and to say to Democrats, we need you to put the pressure on your administration to get this done and to release these things. For Republicans, we need them to say, we need to stand up. We need you to stand up against nonsense within the Republican Party that is somehow sympathetic or parroting Russian Federation and Putin narratives. It's complete nonsense. And we need you to do this. And members of Congress, they look at their constituencies almost like a GPS system. If you're living in my district and you're on my side of the street, I sure care a lot more about what you say than if you're on the other side of the street in somebody else's district. I'm like, how nice for you. I don't really care what you think, but if you're in my district, I care. And what we're having this conversation days away from incredibly consequential elections. And some of you are listening and participating on this call in battleground states. I've never lived in a battleground state. I would love to live in one. But you're in battleground states. You're going to decide this in incredibly consequential decisions and have a real opportunity. One other last point. Back in the year 2000, George W. Bush won the state of Florida and won the presidency, therefore, by about, 547 votes, something like that, under 600 votes in a state where millions and millions and millions were cast. So what does that mean? That means Mrs. McGillicuddy and the Gainesville Garden Club decided the election. I mean, they decided the presidency. So it is not hyperbole for me to say that the amount of influence on this call and the ability to mobilize and to talk to people and to get in front of members of Congress, and it could be that at the next debate, when Congress reconvenes next year, that some of these questions are decided based on conversations that they've heard from voters in their district. Because I'll tell you this, if members of Congress, what you want to do for sure is deny a member of Congress this excuse when they say, well, nobody contacted me. I didn't hear anything about it. And if they don't contact me, I guess they don't care about it. So if all we do tonight is to stay in the echo chamber of this call, tonight is a complete failure, a complete waste of time. What has to happen as a result of this call, it has to organically and intentionally grow to say, hey, the gas is on, honey. We got to get this thing done. We've got until, early November to get in front of people, because we're going to need them to be yeses on these votes. And why isn't it front page news? Because there is so much stuff going on around the world. There is just so much stuff happening. And so members of Congress are dealing with everything from aardvarks to zebras and everything in between. And you got to get their attention. You got to say, hey, member of Congress, this is why this matters. And using some of these arguments that we've heard tonight.
Thank you, Congressman. Ever the very successful politician, it's like you anticipated the chat that's going on while you're talking, including the wonderful comment from Mike in the swing state of Arizona, saying that let's concentrate on the election in a couple of days. And you rightfully pointed out, this is no matter what we talk about today, it's about not just educating voters, but it's about mobilizing voters and making sure that people are going out there. Before I turn to, yes.
If I may just honestly,
будь ласка.
Thank you so much. I just want to say to everybody who is watching, Ukraine would never make it without the United States. And we are very grateful to our partners and to our diaspora who has been going out on the streets, calling everybody and asking to support and help. This is our second front, American front. And depending on what happens here is going to be, it's going to have totally direct consequences what's going to happen in Ukraine at the front lines. So first of all, I really want to thank that you are all together, so that Ukrainians are not fighting, that I can see, I don't know, Roskam from the East Coast and Nova Ukraine from the West Coast, the American Coalition for Ukraine, UKK, the Ukrainians from Wisconsin, Dignitas, everybody aligned to help and support. And honestly, this is our second front when we have to stay together, because Ukraine depends, our lives depend on what is going to happen here. Thank you so much.
Дякую. And it's very important for people to understand that this is the very least that we can do, right? None of us will experience having the privilege of living in this country, a foreign tank rolling through our streets, which is something that way too many Ukrainians have had to witness, have had to see their homes destroyed. And I think that's why we've focused on so many topics here today, not just the practical topics about why Ukraine is important, but actually the naslidki. So what happens if a country like Ukraine were to be taken over? What happens to the rest of the world? Before I ask Timofey to respond to that, I'm going to do one more poll. And again, we're sending all this information to people who are outside of this sphere, some of the journalists in Ukraine, as well as in the United States, trying to figure out what our community, how it's activated. And so this question is, for those of you who are voting, can you tell us tonight, are you a first-time voter? Have you voted before, or have you voted before in another country and now are starting to vote here in the United States? This just gets a better sense of who is joining us here tonight. And we're going to have one more question at the end. After we talk to a couple of more people that we're going to close with, including our friends from UKK directly. So I see that we have the majority of people who are tuning in here are previous voters. That's good. The following question will be how active you actually are. But when you vote previously, that's very important. The fact that you are a Ukraine supporter and you're a voter, political parties very much know in the United States who you are, especially in the age of social media. So the more you are a long-term voter, you are a valued voter. That means that your concerns, which again, they discover through social media, through your shopping habits, or through your advocacy and interaction with Congress itself, they understand that this is a constituency that they need to react to. It's not just that you are an occasional voter, but if you're somebody who actively votes in state, local, and federal elections, those are the kind of people that your member of Congress and Congressman Roskam can probably tell you better than I. Those are the kind of people that are valued by political campaigns, and therefore your opinion, when Ukraine matters to you, is something that's going to matter to them. Timofey has joined us from Ukraine, and I did want to come back to him because he was invoked by Sasha earlier. Timofey, there was a comment made about the entire way, because I brought up Korea first and foremost, but when Sasha started speaking about the value of our dollars, this is a very real thing. Whether you're talking, as again, I brought up Korea as the first example of things to be worried about. Of course, the United States has nearly 30,000 troops there. There has been a significant change in Korea's economy due to the fact that money has been transferred from the Russian Federation for their artillery. But it's also these naslidki that we can keep talking about. Like Sasha mentioned, that the bills that the United States has passed have been all inclusive. They are not just funding the allocation of material that's already in American warehouses being sent to Ukraine, but they are for other programs in case the world is to fall apart. And that does include African countries and the wheat for them. Specifically, in the very first bill, they included training for different farmers in parts of the world that rely on Ukrainian wheat, how to develop fertilizer on themselves through manure and other local resources, as opposed to relying on product from Russia. So this entire thing that we talked earlier when we asked you a question about how American tax dollars are affected as far as what happens if Ukraine were to fall. But it's really the international picture altogether. So when we're trying to convince our friends that it's important to support those who support Ukraine as we go vote, what is the international picture? What are the dominoes that our budget could not handle, whether it's countries like Lebanon or other Middle East or even South Asian countries that are reliant on Ukrainian food, that are subsequent after effects of this problem, not least of which what were to happen if North Korea were to get too bullish as far as American taxpayer effects.
So before the war, Ukraine provided food security to about 400 million people, 500 million, around the world, specifically in the Middle East and in Southern Africa. Of course, Ukraine now is extremely restricted in its ability to provide food security, but it continues to export. About 20-30% of our land is mined. We have logistical problems. But the important part is that if Ukraine were to not necessarily even fall, but to be consistently and continuously destabilized, it won't be able to support its agriculture at the level it was doing it before the war. So that means higher food prices. For the world, that doesn't necessarily mean that the prices for food will be higher in the United States, but it means that the world will be destabilized. Poverty and poor food security is the main reason, is the first reason for instability in a lot of areas of the world. That simply means a much less safe world, a much bigger expenditure of the United States to support its security. There is this argument that the US could be isolationist and, the EU should deal with its own problems, then problems in other countries, it's their own problems, and the US is strong enough to be able to sort of mind its own business. It is true in the short run immediately. But of course, we see that the rest of the world, especially the forces opposing and directly threatening the United States, have been uniting, have been consolidating and coordinating their actions. And that, of course, in the longer run will chip away, and that longer run could be the question of several years, actually, could chip away and will chip away at the standing of the United States, its ability to dictate or get good deals and terms in geopolitical considerations. It will affect the trade, it will affect the technology development. It will affect fundamentally, it will affect in the jargon terms, the labor productivity, which means in practice salaries. So it will have consequences and implications for the quality of life and the economic development of the United States, but it's not going to happen overnight.
Дякую дуже. Thank you for that very direct answer. Because again, we are confronted with this on a daily basis. This not often enough is this topic raised at the White House or in Defense Department or State Department briefings. And if they can't, if we as voters can't get answers from them, then it's very hard for us to convince friends and family that we're interested in getting to the polls. Speaking of which, before I introduce my next speaker, I have one last poll for us. And this specifically it relates to how our community and everybody on this call specifically is planning to spend their time before this election. So we know that your phones are blowing up from the campaign asking for campaign dollars. And that's just one thing that people tend to do, but it's really the on-the-ground effort. So if you've never had the opportunity, we know that Congressman Roskam has just returned from another country where he observed an election. But here in the United States, you have more opportunity than just going to vote. You can volunteer in a whole bunch of activities, whether that's on the local level, if you have a congressman that you're really interested in making sure, or congresswoman, that they get reelected, you can volunteer. It's totally fine, even though this is a non-partisan event. It's totally encouraged, and we encourage everybody to get involved in the American process. The more they know you, the more your community and you as a representative, whether that's because you have a weird last name, whether that's because you bring a Ukrainian T-shirt to an event when you're going door-to-door knocking. This is how our community gets seen. And as I mentioned to several members of Congress just in the last year alone, when they say that perhaps Americans don't care about what's happening in Ukraine, it's always our physical presence, whether it's volunteering at events or just talking to people. It's our physical presence of existing in the United States that reminds them that it's that Ukrainians have been here in this country and we are a part of this country. And like Sasha said, for a country like Ukraine that's being invaded, that's often the biggest part. So thank you for answering a lot of these polls. I would like to ask a special guest to come on now. I would like to ask the newly elected president of UPK, who is the head of the Ukrainian National Information Service office in Washington, to join us, as he has already been sending out emails since, I believe, September about registering to vote, making sure people have the election on their calendar and on their timeline. Mikhail, how can we get our people represented a little bit more?
Andrew, thank you very much for the question, and I thank all the other panelists as well for their thoughts. I thank them for their opinions, and obviously in terms of the action that is necessary for all of us as concerned Americans, whether you're a hyphenated American being a Ukrainian American or any other type of ethnicity, we are first and foremost all Americans, and we're doing this because it's of U.S. national security interest. It's of U.S. national security interest to have strong allies, whether that is in Europe, whether that is in Asia, other parts of the country, obviously through a multilateral organization such as NATO and so forth. But in particular, let's boil it down to what's about to happen in 13 days. It is our opportunity to express our voice. And there's no better quote that I can think of other than former Speaker of the House of Representatives, Tip O'Neill, that said that all politics is local. I think the congressman referenced this earlier when he was discussing in terms of understanding that constituents come to a particular congressional office seeking assistance, assistance when it comes to a particular issue, or obviously when it comes to something that's on a local basis that would affect, obviously, the lives of certain citizens in a congressional district. But exactly to the point that the congressman had mentioned, Florida in the year 2000 was won by 500 votes. Every vote matters. That's why it's not even so much in terms of everything that we're doing, registering to vote, going to vote, but be more proactive about it. It's not just one voice and one vote. It's actually doing other things such as volunteering. Volunteer to go canvass for a particular political candidate. Do this on a local basis, do this on a statewide basis, and do this on a federal basis as well. I think that's one of the important things that we miss, is that everything happens on a local basis. Everything stems from the ground up within our democracy. Our democracy warrants our active participation. So it's not just the active participation of registering to vote and actually going into the voting booth on the election day itself or early voting, but it's obviously doing other things that can warrant our participation and to show that we are concerned about these particular issues. It's important to try to meet with your elected officials as much as possible. Again, whether on a local basis, on a statewide basis, or on a federal basis, interact with them. The congressman knows that town hall meetings happen all the time within electoral districts as a member of Congress comes back and wants to meet with his constituents, wants to hear what's on their minds. This is a great opportunity to be active, to be proactive, if anything else like that, and obviously to bring the issue of Ukraine first and foremost. There's so many political polls that have been stated in the past year, 2 years, 2.5 years of the war, of where the average American citizen or how America as a society is supporting Ukraine. I would say a majority, 65+%, are in full support of assistance to Ukraine. That means that we have a mandate. We do have a mandate, but that's not just us as Ukrainian Americans. Build a network. Go to your local media outlets as well. Interact with them. Send them letters to the editor to show that it's not just Ukrainian Americans, but every American obviously has something to gain when it comes to supporting Ukraine. A lot of these bills, it was mentioned as well, a lot of these bills is not so much giving Ukraine direct foreign assistance. It's maintaining economic jobs and economy here in the United States. We have to understand that this is truly within the U.S. national security interests. And once we provide that type of analysis to all of our friends, to our neighbors, that this is in the U.S. national interest, I think that that's where we prevail in all of our discussions, whether it's in Congress or other parts of the country as well. Lastly, I just want to say in terms of advocacy, continue the advocacy up to election day, continue the advocacy after election day, but think about the advocacy in a brand new Congress. We will have 50+ brand new members of Congress vying for open seats for the next Congress coming in January. We will have to interact with them. Let's find the Ukrainian communities in those 50 open seats. Let's interact with those particular members of Congress. Let's give them the information of those constituents, those that voted, and put them into the office of being a representative within that particular state, within that particular district. So there are many opportunities. There's advocacy in terms of the Stand With Ukraine bill. The Stand With Ukraine bill, which is a bipartisan bill, both in the Senate and both in the House, they are analogous bills. This provides an opportunity to assist Ukraine, but it's also of benefit to the U.S. economy. What can we provide Ukraine that Ukraine eventually can provide for the United States as well in terms of economic benefits? I think it's very important as well, as we were discussing the North Korea incident and the North Korea troops that are right now training within Russia, is to let Ukraine strike back. Let Ukraine, give Ukraine the capacities for long-range strikes within Russian military and other types of strategic assets within the Russian Federation. That's the only way to stop the innocent killing of civilians in Ukraine, and obviously for those on the front lines in Ukraine defending democracy. This democracy Our democracy throughout the world is in peril right now if we do not support Ukraine. Make that known in terms of your networks. Make that known to your neighbors that we're all in this together. Ukraine needs to win this fight, not just for its own territory, not just for its own sovereignty, not just for its own independence, but for world sovereignty and for world democracy and those principles of democracy, those principles of democratic institutions, and the values which we hold near and dear. So I call upon you as we approach election day, as Congress comes back in a lame duck session. There could be opportunities for other legislative initiatives to be done. Let's work hand in hand. Let's get the job done this year and also look forward to next year. So, Andrei, thank you very much. And thank you to all the organizers of this. I look forward to interacting with everyone and looking forward to a vibrant discussion in the future as well.
Дякую, Михайле. Thank you to all of our speakers. I see we've run let's say we're into the penalty minutes phase of the World Cup match. We're definitely not going to go into the penalty kicks, but there were a couple of great questions. Rai was a real superstar in answering a lot of these questions online. For those of you who haven't been catching up on the chat, the entire chat will be saved. So if there are any more questions, I will ask any of our speakers if they have anything else left to say, whether that's Ambassador Herbst, Sasha, I see that Congressman Roskam is still here. Timofey, again, staying up so late for us. If you would like to have a closing word, before I turn to that, I'd like to also thank everybody for staying along this late and just answer that for everybody who responded to the polls. I thank you for doing that. And to the one question about whether it's worth it to volunteer, just listen to what Mikhailo said, listen to what Congressman Roskam said before. Any kind of volunteering that you go out, the question was specifically, was it whether it's worth it to go out of state? If your state is something that really doesn't change its color, I've had a wonderful time volunteering out of the states. Maria, who's on here and one of the principal organizers tonight from the Chicago or the Illinois division of UKK, was just on a road trip with her congressman to Wisconsin and engaging with voters there. It's absolutely worthwhile. It's probably as worthwhile as the congressman's trip to Moldova was just this week, because you're interacting with voters themselves, and it does make a difference. So again, if any of our speakers would like an additional word, Ambassador.
I have another commitment, so I'll speak briefly and then get off. There's something else that we should be doing. After the election, we should be encouraging people in Congress, because especially on the Senate side, they're looking at this, to put into play another bill, supplemental bill of aid to Ukraine for next year. Senators Blumenthal and Graham, Republican and Democrat, are looking at this. I think Senator Kuhn is also interested in this. We need to make sure the White House gets behind it, and we need to make sure it happens. And thank you for organizing this.
John, that's what I was, excuse me, Mr. Ambassador, that's what
Michael, let everyone talk.
That's what I was referring to in terms of other congressional initiatives. So yes.
Right, okay.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador.
Yes. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Sasha, would you have anything to say to add?
Yes, I cannot tell American voters and our friends who are here on the call what to tell to their Congress people how to vote. All I can say right now is thank you, because we feel in Ukraine and we know you're here standing behind our backs. And trust me, we will win this war together, no matter what, no matter how many evil forces unite and how strong they are, we will prevail. And Putin's Russia is going to collapse. And I think no matter who is in the next administration, these people will understand that this is something that is unstoppable. Everybody was afraid when the USSR was collapsing and was saying, like, you have to stay together. We see the same problem right now, that everybody is afraid of Russia to collapse. Well, it's going to happen. And there are going to be many more democratic countries, look at Ichkeria, for example, coming out from that evil, who are fighting right now next to Ukrainians against Russia. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for recognizing those people who are, seeking their own freedom. It is truly going to be a post-Russia that will finally see some peace in Ukraine and all of Europe. Congressman, did you have a couple of words to say?
I do. For the Americans on the call, this is a word to you, because you and I have been brought up in a system that is the envy of the world. And part of the challenge is that we think that the system that we're living in is normal. It's not normal. It's a complete outlier of history. We have lived, and I have grown up in the most prosperous, safe, free political system in the history of mankind. And so the big question is, what do we do with that? I didn't make this system. This is not false modesty. I'm the beneficiary of a system. This is a system that I was just born into. And so I have been entrusted with it, and so have you. So the question becomes, what do we do? Are we a generation that basically says, well, we're going to take ours and we're going to be fine, and we're just going to, turn our backs and walk away from other people that are struggling? No, that's not who we are. We're the people that say, yes, we've been entrusted with this great thing. And with this great thing, we've been entrusted by God. And Scripture says that we have a great responsibility. And so we do. And I think we have a responsibility to use the influence that we have wisely. We have a responsibility to be persuasive. We have a responsibility to be persistent and to be advocates. And it's not only in the interest of Ukraine and those who are fighting around the world, but it's in our interest too. And so I think we're really uniquely positioned. And it's my hope and it's my expectation that in the years to come, you and I are going to be able to reflect back and say, we stepped up when things were incredibly difficult, and we stood by those around the world who were fighting for freedom and asked for help, and we were there for them. And I think it's incumbent upon us, and we will, and especially our children will be grateful that we've done this.
Thank you, Congressman. Timofey, if you're still with us, do you have any other words for our viewers here in the United States?
Yeah, thank you. I think this is a difficult world. It's not as bad as it was at during the 20th century, but it has the potential to become worse. And it takes leadership. It takes collective leadership and collective responsibility to act to prevent deterioration of the world. It is actually something each of us can do. I think it's not that difficult. It just we tend to worry about all these big things. What about what will be what happens with the war, but most of them we can't affect. What we can affect is to do steps which are under our control. For Americans is to vote, and to vote honestly, to be informed, to speak your mind. Okay, I'm not a U.S. citizen, I'm a green card holder, so it's not my place to say, but I think truth and informed voting is the key for democracy to prosper. And democracy will remain strong if people simply pay attention and speak their minds and do the right thing. So I think it is important that Ukraine is represented. It is important that Russia is checked, but it is also important that democracy is not undermined, and we continue to vote, and we continue to vote in an informed manner.
Дякую. And again, thank you so much for joining from your location tonight. With that, Mariu, can I turn to you to give us a final closing for the night?
Thank you, everyone, so much for joining, for being here, for educating all of us and voters here. And I want to remind everyone that our vote is our weapon, and then we have to use it wisely, because we can defend ourselves with that vote. Many fought and died protecting that right to vote, and many in Ukraine are now fighting and dying so Ukraine could be free. So vote. Make sure everyone around you votes, but also choose wisely, because upon your choices depends the future of Ukraine and the United States at the moment. I want to thank all the partnering organizations, Dignitas, Protect Ukraine Now, Ukrainian Daughters Foundation, Wisconsin Ukrainians, Razom for Ukraine, and Nova. So thank you everyone for making this possible. And I think we're going to do more of these. It looks like there's a lot of interest, and hopefully we'll see you everyone again soon.
Okay, as I promised, no penalty time, just some additional minutes. Thank you very much. Thank you, Maria. And as Mikhailo mentioned, and the congressman, don't forget there's more work to be done after the election as well. So let's make sure that we go out and vote. But let's, Maria, maybe we do these after the election and see how many new members of Congress we can contact as well, because that's another thing we have to work on as well. Дякую. Don't forget to vote. Vote early, vote by mail, vote in person. But whatever you do, make sure you vote and make sure that the people who are there at the polling station are appreciated and thanked. Thank you very much for joining us tonight, and we hope to see you soon.